Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe, and turn on notifications.
James had arrived in that remote town on a cloudy Monday morning. It wasn't a tourist spot, nor was it charming. It was the kind of place where houses still had low, peeling wooden fences. The downtown was made up of just a few main streets, and every day felt the same. But he was there on business. A new system needed to be installed at a local company, and no one else on the team wanted to make the trip. So he went. No expectations, no rush, and above all, no plans. On the afternoon of the third day, after another exhausting meeting and a weak cup of coffee served in a plastic cup, James decided to go for a walk. The town was small, and there wasn't much to do besides wait for the files to finish uploading into the system. By chance, he turned a corner on a street whose name he couldn't even remember and stopped in front of an antique shop. The display window was dusty, and the sign above the door had faded letters. Even so, something about that shop attracted him. Maybe it was nostalgia, or boredom, or just the urge to see something different. He went in. The bell above the door jingled like it was waking up from a long sleep. Inside, the smell was a mix of old wood and forgotten memories. James looked around. Crooked paintings, wall clocks, typewriters, books with torn covers, and countless objects that seemed to have better stories than his. He was wandering among the shelves, distracted, when a gentle yet firm voice called out, "James?" It was like time froze. He turned slowly, as if not wanting to believe what he'd heard. And then he saw her. Claire. Standing just a few steps away, holding a porcelain cup. Her hair was shorter, lighter, but her eyes, those eyes, he would have recognized them anywhere in the world. The same eyes that had charmed him years ago. The same eyes that had betrayed him. 9 years had gone by since the last time they'd been in the same space. 9 long years since James found out about Claire's affair. It wasn't just the cheating that destroyed him, it was the fact that she didn't hesitate. Didn't cry. Didn't try to stop him from leaving. She just stayed silent, as if guilt were an outfit she'd chosen to wear that day. "Claire," he murmured, still unsure if this was real. She smiled, a shy, uncomfortable smile. "I never thought I'd run into you here." "Neither did I think you'd still be alive," he answered, with an involuntary hint of sarcasm. She took a step closer. "I live here now." It took James a moment to wrap his head around that. This town? Claire? He would never have imagined it. In his mind, Claire belonged to another world, a world of fancy cafes, rooftop parties, and unfulfilled promises. "I moved here after everything fell apart." James crossed his arms. "You mean, after you married the guy you cheated on me with?" Claire lowered her gaze. "Yeah. I stayed with him for 7 years. But, that ended too." Silence. One of those heavy silences that seems to fill the whole room. The bell on the door jingled again when an older man walked in and greeted the shop owner. Claire backed away a little, respecting James's space. He watched her like someone seeing a ghost. He didn't know if he felt anger, relief, or just an overwhelming tiredness. She broke the silence. "I know I have no right to ask anything, but, want to grab a coffee with me?" James hesitated. Every fiber of his being told him not to revisit the past. But curiosity won out. "Sure, just a coffee." A few minutes later, they were sitting in a modest coffee shop, with wooden tables and floral curtains in the windows. It wasn't anything special, but the smell of fresh bread and strong coffee brought a certain comfort. The conversation started out stiff, with long pauses and cautious glances. But, little by little, words started flowing again. Claire said that after the divorce, she decided to stay in town. She said she found peace there, away from the hectic life she used to crave. Now she works in a ceramic shop. She has a simple routine. And she likes it. James talked about his job, his travels, the attempts at relationships that never worked out. "I guess after you, no one else really fit," he said, half smiling, half serious. Claire sighed. "I know I hurt you. And I know there's nothing I can say now that'll erase it. But, if it helps at all, I regret it every single day." James didn't respond. He just stared at the bottom of his empty cup. For a moment, he saw his own reflection in it, broken, but still whole enough to keep going. "Want to have lunch with me tomorrow?" Claire asked, like she was taking a big chance. He didn't answer right away. But in the end, he said yes. And when they stood up, James realized he wasn't angry anymore. He felt something worse. A small flicker of hope. The next morning, the sky was clear, like the whole town had decided to cooperate with their reunion. James got ready more carefully than usual. He ironed his shirt twice, switched his watch, fixed his hair 3 times before stepping away from the mirror in his hotel room. He told himself it was just lunch, just a conversation, just curiosity about the past that needed to be satisfied. But deep down, he knew it was more than that. That afternoon felt like it could change everything he thought he'd moved on from. He got to the address Claire gave him. It was a small restaurant, tucked among low trees and a simple white fence that gave it a sort of country feel. There weren't lines at the door or waiters rushing around. It was discreet, calm, with soft instrumental music and nicely spaced tables. There was no rush, just a strange feeling that time stretched on and on. Claire was already there, sitting at a table by a window looking out on a side garden. She wore a simple yet elegant dark blue dress. When she saw him, she gave that same restrained smile she had the day before, as if she wasn't sure she could let herself smile fully. James walked over, and she stood up to greet him. The hug was brief, but enough for him to catch her perfume, the same she used to wear years ago. And that disarmed him even more. They sat, ordered wine, and chatted lightly for a while. The food was excellent, although James barely noticed what he was eating. What kept him there was Claire's gaze. He wasn't sure if what he saw in it was longing, regret, or simple loneliness. Maybe all of that. She spoke calmly, choosing her words carefully. And he listened like someone revisiting a landscape he knew but trying to see it in a new way. They reminisced over wine. Good times they'd had, the trips, the plans they'd made. Claire laughed about an old story where they got lost in New Orleans and ended up having dinner at a hidden little bar that became their favorite. James laughed too. The memory still felt warm. It still lived somewhere in him, tucked away. Things grew more intimate, more tender. It wasn't exactly passion, nor was it just nostalgia. It was somewhere in between, something that didn't have a name yet but was growing between them like an old ember flaring up again. The restaurant music shifted to something even softer, almost a whisper, like the place itself wanted them to feel at ease. Claire gently picked up her glass and looked at James the way he remembered, like someone about to make up her mind. She leaned in a bit, resting her arm on the table. "I know this is strange, but there's something here," she said quietly, like she was confessing a secret. James didn't answer with words. He just looked at her for a few seconds, then glanced away, as though trying to avoid what he already knew. But Claire put her hand on his, firmly, not hesitating. He returned the gesture. Not quickly, but fully aware that he was crossing a line. After lunch, they walked together to the parking lot. Outside, the late afternoon light seemed dipped in gold. It was that kind of light that makes everything look prettier than it really is. Claire leaned against James's car, still wearing that shy smile. "Want to go to your hotel?" she asked in a tone that wasn't playful, but left no doubt what she meant. James hesitated for 3 seconds that felt much longer. Then he unlocked the car. At the hotel, there was no hurry. What happened there was almost silent, like every gesture was translated from an old memory. No promises, no declarations of love. Just 2 people trying to get back a piece of themselves left behind in time. When Claire left, the sun was gone, and the town looked asleep. James spent a while by the window, filled with a tangled mix of emotions. Part of him felt alive again. Another part felt suspicious. But physically, he felt light. Like he'd let go of a burden he hadn't realized he was carrying. In the days that followed, something interesting happened. His previously solitary, repetitive work routine now had a sweet break in the middle of the afternoon. Lunch here, a walk there, an afternoon in his hotel room. Their meetups became frequent, almost automatic. But there was a pattern. Claire always chose discreet, out of the way, almost hidden places. James started to notice. At first with mild curiosity, then with growing discomfort. One time, when he suggested a new restaurant downtown, she said it was too busy, too noisy. "I like quieter places," she explained. And indeed, everything was always very quiet. James wasn't naive. Not anymore. The so-called peace Claire said she found in that town had layers. And some of them seemed to hide more than reveal. Still, he kept silent for now. Sometimes the truth comes out on its own. He was learning to wait. On the 6th night of that string of strangely intense days, James was sitting on the edge of his bed, shirt unbuttoned, half a glass of whiskey in his hand, his head spinning, not from the alcohol, but from the restlessness building inside him. The hotel room was quiet, lit only by a soft bedside lamp. Outside, the town slept, or at least pretended to, the way Claire used to do when they shared a bed years back, after there was no affection left, only a facade. The thought started to get under his skin. The pattern. The predictability. Always the same kind of place. Always the same rush to leave. Always the same way of dodging direct questions with a charming smile that made it feel like everything was fine. But it wasn't. At first, James had tried telling himself it was just how she was. Maybe Claire really did like discreet places, maybe she was still wounded from her recent breakup, maybe she was protecting herself from judgment. He tried to find reasons for her absences, her rushing off right after they met up, the vague excuses, the always carefully managed schedules. But his instinct wasn't the instinct of a lovesick man anymore, it was the instinct of someone who'd learned to read the signs before it was too late. That night, he decided he wouldn't ask questions. Wouldn't push. But he also decided he'd watch. Carefully. Even coldly, if he had to. The next day, Claire showed up at the usual time, bringing a simple lemon cake and 2 coffees she insisted were from the best shop in town. James smiled, pretended to be easygoing, but he was already on alert. They chatted for almost an hour, until he dropped a suggestion, "Stay with me tonight." Claire hesitated. Not like someone who's caught off guard, but like someone who already knew the answer was no. She bit her lip, glanced at the clock on the wall, and said, "Not tonight. I have plans." "Then, let me drive you home," he offered, trying to sound casual. "No need, I already called a cab." Her response came too fast, too rehearsed. James just nodded and smiled. "All right. Take care." As soon as she headed down to the lobby, James turned off the lights in his room, grabbed his jacket and car keys, and followed at a distance. He parked on the other side of the street and watched from inside his car. A few minutes later, a cab arrived. Claire climbed into the back seat, and it pulled away. James took a deep breath, waited 30 seconds, and started tailing it, keeping a safe distance. The streets were almost empty, which made things tense, any sudden movement would stand out. But he was patient. The cab took a long avenue, then turned into a nicer neighborhood. The houses were big, with manicured gardens and low walls. The car slowed down, then stopped in front of a classy-looking house with a light-colored facade, large windows, and lights on inside. Claire got out, glanced around, and stepped through the front gate, closing it behind her like she did it every day. James parked a few yards away, under a tree, engine off, heart racing. What was he expecting to see? What was he hoping to find? Maybe part of him still wanted to be wrong, wanted this to be some paranoid fantasy born of old scars. But that part of him was about to vanish for good. About 30 minutes later, a black car turned the corner slowly and pulled into the house's garage. James recognized the model immediately, before even seeing the driver's face. It was impossible to forget. He'd first seen that car 9 years ago, parked in front of his own house, while Claire said they'd needed to talk openly. It was the car of the man she'd cheated with. The man she married. The same man she'd told James she was separated from. James stayed still for a few minutes. Then he let out a short, bitter laugh. "Incredible, Claire," he muttered, shaking his head. He wasn't surprised. It was just the same story again. And somehow, that hurt even more. His mind raced, not with the impulse of a wounded heart but the cold logic of someone who doesn't want revenge, just the truth. And, above all, he wanted to put a final period where there had only been an ellipsis. He wasn't about to confront her that night. He didn't knock on the door. He didn't call. He didn't text. He stayed silent, and waited for her next move. Driving back to the hotel, he felt both pathetic and oddly calm. Like the disappointment he'd been afraid of for so long had finally shown itself, and thus it wasn't a ghost anymore. It was real. He was facing the same old ghosts, only this time, with eyes open, without blind love or illusions. And if Claire thought she could steer the situation the way she did back then, she was mistaken. James wasn't the same man he'd been 9 years ago. He knew what to do. And he'd do it right. 2 days passed after that night when James followed the cab and saw, with his own eyes, what he'd been suspecting. Claire was still married to the man who'd destroyed their marriage years earlier, and she was once again lying. Toying with his feelings. Quietly fueling his hopes with that sweet, nostalgic charm that he now saw in a different light. Yes, the past had come back, but not to be fixed. It was there to test how much he'd learned from his pain. On Tuesday morning, James's phone buzzed with a new message. It was Claire. "Meet me tomorrow at 5 p.m. at Willow Park. There's a quiet area full of trees. I think you'll like it." He read and reread the message for a while. Then he put the phone down and went to shower. Under the hot water, the plan started taking shape. He didn't want revenge. That was too small. What he wanted was to let the truth show itself. In the rawest way possible. The next morning, after double-checking the code for the system he was setting up for his client, he spent a few minutes on a simple but decisive step. He created a new phone number with an app and wrote a short, direct text, no signature. Before doing that, he'd done a quick online search, and with a little effort, found her husband's number on a public record site. "Today, at 5 p.m., Willow Park. Your wife will be there with another man. Go see for yourself." James didn't know if the guy would actually show up. He didn't really care. All that mattered was that, for the first time, Claire would have to face the consequences of her repeated lies. Not through a shouting match. Not with a scene. But with the naked truth, right there for all to see. No more denying, no more running. He got to the park 10 minutes early. The sky was clear, and a light breeze gently rustled the tree leaves. Claire had chosen a really nice spot. A secluded corner with a big, thick-trunked tree full of flowering branches that offered shade and privacy. The kind of place where couples kiss, thinking no one is watching. She showed up right on time, wearing a simple beige dress and carrying a small thermos. "I brought tea," she said, smiling like everything was perfectly fine. James returned the smile with a calm that she didn't recognize at first. A kind of calm that didn't come from trust, but from knowing exactly what was about to happen. They chatted for a few minutes on a wooden bench under the tree. She mentioned the weather, the flowers, how the park had become her refuge since she'd moved to town. James pretended to listen. He gave short replies, nods. He kept an eye on the gravel path, watching for the moment someone might show up. Claire then moved closer. She touched his face. Her fingers were still soft, but they felt oddly cold now. "Do you ever miss us?" she asked, her voice low. James watched her for a moment and answered with a question, "And you? Are you ready to be honest now?" She didn't get it right away. Or pretended not to. "What do you mean?" "Nothing. Just wondering." She turned her eyes away, maybe on instinct. And that was precisely when a voice thundered behind them, shattering the calm, "Claire? What are you doing?" The shout ripped through the air, freezing her in place. Claire jumped up, spun around, and went pale, like she'd seen a ghost. He was there. The same man from the fancy house. The same man from 9 years ago. The man she claimed was part of her past. "Jacob," was all she managed to say. James stayed seated, completely calm. Like he was watching a play he himself had written. "Who are you?" Jacob snapped, staring at James with his neck veins bulging. James stood up slowly. "My name is James. She told me she was single. Said she was trying to start over. I thought she deserved another chance." But apparently, he looked at Claire, it was just the same old game. Claire brought her hands to her head. She couldn't form words. Jacob glared at her, furious. "You've been cheating on me?" She tried to explain, but only broken phrases came out, powerless. I didn't know what else to do. I felt alone." James stepped back a couple of paces, looked at them both, and spoke in a firm tone, "You two have a lot to talk about." And he walked off, without looking back. Little by little, the sound of Claire and Jacob arguing faded behind him. James didn't catch the details. He didn't need to. He'd heard those words before, differently arranged, with different excuses. Same story, different stage. He headed for his car with his hands in his pockets, the breeze gently blowing against his face, his conscience clear. He hadn't won or lost. He just freed himself from a cycle that kept repeating itself. And now, maybe that scene would stay in Claire's mind so she'd no longer be able to pretend she wasn't hurting people with her cowardice. James drove back to the hotel in silence. He didn't even turn on the radio. He just let the empty road guide him, the sun beginning to set, painting the sky orange, as if the whole universe were closing another chapter. In the days following that scene in the park, it felt like the air itself got lighter, or maybe James's soul was finally calm. He went on with his routine in a quiet, steady manner, like someone who just organized the last drawer of a messy past. At the client's office, the reports came together, the data got sorted, the systems responded flawlessly. But something in him was also being rearranged. The hours no longer dragged. The coffee had a different flavor. And at night, when he lay on his hotel bed, there was no longer that slow-burning anxiety that kept him awake. Claire didn't show up at all that week. No messages, no calls, no attempt to explain herself or salvage what she'd lost. Part of James wondered if she'd finally understood, if she'd realized that repeating certain mistakes stops being an accident and becomes a deliberate and cruel choice. But another part, more skeptical and experienced, figured her silence was just a pause, not the end. That got confirmed on a Saturday afternoon, when James was coming back from the grocery store with a bag of fruit and a local paper he'd picked up more from habit than anything else. As he reached the hotel lobby, the clerk called him over. "Mr. James, someone's waiting for you in the lounge." He didn't need to ask who. He simply took a deep breath, walked toward the glassed-in area, and spotted her on a sofa, staring at the teacup in her hands like she was trying to warm herself from the inside out. Claire looked exhausted. Her hair was hastily tied up, her face had no makeup, her expression weary. When she saw him, she jumped to her feet. Hi," he said, keeping it short but polite. She tried to smile, but it didn't stick. I know you don't want to see me. I know that, after all that happened, the last thing you wanted was to hear me out, but I had to come. James stayed where he was, hands in his pockets, listening. He didn't speak, just observed her. I left Jacob, she said, her voice trembling. Really? He replied, lifting an eyebrow. This time it's for real? Claire nodded. He moved out the morning after the scene at the park. James looked at her for a few seconds, like he was staring at a puzzle he'd already solved. So, why are you here, Claire? She took a long breath. To apologize. For everything. For the past, for cheating, for lying to you now. I'm not asking for anything, James. Not love, not a new beginning, not forgiveness. I just wanted you to know I regretted it. That I regret it every day. And that, for the first time in a long while. I'm trying to change. James slowly sat in one of the armchairs, crossing his legs, gazing out the window. Outside, a few leaves blew around in a gentle breeze. Do you really want to know what I think? He asked, still not looking at her. She nodded. He turned to her, meeting her gaze, his own firm but not hostile. When I saw you in that shop, my heart skipped a beat. Part of me wanted to run. Another part of me wanted to hug you and erase everything you put me through. But now I see things clearly. You didn't just pop back into my life by chance. You were my final test. The proof that I learned from all that pain. And you know what the lesson was? She didn't answer. She just looked at him with tears in her eyes. That love without respect is poison. That missing someone isn't an excuse to degrade yourself. And that if someone deceives you once, maybe they can make it right. But if they choose to lie again, there's something inside them that no amount of love can fix. Claire lowered her head. The silence was heavy. Painful. James stood up. He walked over to her and stopped just a step away. I don't hate you, Claire. I did once. I cried, blamed myself, wondered 1,000 times what I did wrong for you to betray me like that. But now, I just want peace. And there's no peace with you. You need to live your life. And stop playing with people's feelings. You need to learn how to be alone, to look in the mirror, and face who you are. She tried to say something, but he gently cut her off with a raised hand, like he was setting a period to the conversation. Do me a favor, don't ever look for me again. Claire let out a shaky breath, nodded, picked up her purse, turned, and left. No drama. No big scene. Just the weight on her shoulders of someone who, maybe for the first time, understood the full depth of the consequences she caused. James went back to the armchair. He glanced at the newspaper he was still holding and started to leaf through it. Outside, the wind was already carrying the leaves away. And he knew, some people come into our lives like autumn, beautiful, unforgettable, but meant to go. At that moment, he didn't need anyone else to feel whole. He had finally found himself again. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next time.